I came home late that night. Work had drained me, my head was pounding, and all I wanted was to collapse onto the couch and forget the world existed. But as soon as I stepped into the house, I felt it. Something was off. The lights in the living room were dimmed, casting long shadows against the walls. In the center of the coffee table sat a small, neatly wrapped box. At first, I thought it was a gift, maybe an early anniversary present, or even a peace offering after the strange distance that had been growing between me and my wife, Lenora, for the past few months. I set down my briefcase, loosened my tie, and walked over, staring at the box as if it might move. It was wrapped in deep blue paper with a gold ribbon, too formal for anything casual. Something about it made my stomach tighten. "Lenora," I called out, but the house was eerily silent. I sat down and slowly pulled the ribbon, unwrapping the gift with careful fingers. The moment I lifted the lid, my heart slammed against my ribs. Inside, stacked neatly, were divorce papers. My name, her name, the official court stamps, it was all there. And on top of the documents was a small white note with just 3 words, "It's for the best." For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the papers as a strange numbness crawled up my spine. My marriage, my life, was being presented to me like a parting gift, wrapped with a bow and signed with indifference. I should have felt anger, maybe even relief, but all I felt was this deep, echoing hollowness. Then, I heard the front door open. Lenora walked in, heels clicking against the floor, a confident smile on her lips as if she had just finished some victorious negotiation. She wasn't wearing the usual exhaustion of a long day. No, she looked energized, triumphant. She stopped when she saw me sitting there, holding the divorce papers. Her smile faltered for only a second before she smoothed her features, tilting her head. "You got my gift," she said casually, as if she had left me a book or a new tie. I exhaled slowly, setting the papers back into the box with eerie calm. Then, I met her gaze and smiled, really smiled. "Wait till your lover sees this," I said softly. And just like that, the confidence in her eyes cracked. Lenora's expression wavered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. She always did. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, I suppose, had a talent for keeping her mask in place. She walked past me as if nothing was wrong, as if dropping a box of divorce papers on the table was a normal Tuesday night activity. I watched as she slipped out of her coat, hanging it neatly in the closet, then made her way to the kitchen. The sound of a wine bottle being uncorked filled the silence between us. I sat still, the divorce papers heavy in my lap, my mind a storm of questions. I wasn't an idiot. I had suspected for a while that something was off. The late nights, the sudden secrecy, the way she kept her phone practically glued to her hand. But I had never confronted her. Maybe I had been in denial. Maybe I had just wanted to believe that after years of marriage, after everything we had built together, she would at least have the decency to be honest with me. Instead, she handed me the end of our marriage like a parting gift. "You're taking this well," she finally said, pouring herself a glass of red wine. She didn't offer me one. I leaned back against the couch, my fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. Should I be throwing things? Crying? Begging you to reconsider? My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness I wasn't even trying to hide. Lenora took a slow sip of wine, her nails clicking against the glass. "That's not really your style, is it?" She was right. I wasn't the type to explode. I wasn't the type to make a scene, but I was the type to listen, to observe, to wait for the truth to reveal itself. And right now, I can see it in the way she avoided my gaze, the way she shifted her weight slightly. Something was still hidden beneath the surface. "You didn't even leave a reason," I said, gesturing to the papers. "Just, it's for the best. That's cold, even for you." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Would it have made a difference? If I sat you down and explained every little detail, would you have listened?" I tilted my head. "Try me." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then, with a slow exhale, she set her glass down and finally met my eyes. "Fine. You want the truth." She folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "I've changed, and you're still the same." I raised an eyebrow. "Still the same. You're predictable. Steady. Reliable." She said the words like they were an insult. "You come home at the same time every day. You order the same coffee every morning. You talk about work, about bills, about the future like it's some carefully mapped out road." She scoffed. "I need more than that. I need excitement, passion. And I found it elsewhere." There it was. The admission. I had expected it, but hearing it aloud still hit differently. The words settled over me like a weight, but they didn't crush me. Instead, I felt something shift inside, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. And he gives you that? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Lenora didn't even hesitate. Yes. I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. So, this was it. This was why she had been pulling away, why she had been distant. It wasn't about us growing apart. It was about her finding someone she thought was better. Someone who made her feel alive. I exhaled through my nose, setting the papers aside. And you think this new life, this new guy, he's really going to be everything you want? She gave a small, smug smile. He already is. I watched her carefully. The confidence in her eyes, the certainty. She truly believed this. I should have been angry. I should have been heartbroken. Maybe a part of me was. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being the stable one, the one who always tried to keep things together while she searched for something more. I stood up slowly, grabbing the box with the divorce papers and tucking it under my arm. Lenora raised an eyebrow. Where are you going? I met her gaze, a small smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. To make sure your lover sees this. And for the first time that night, her confidence cracked. Lenora had always been composed, always held herself with the kind of self-assured confidence that made people believe she was untouchable. But in that moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something quick, but unmistakable. A crack in the mask. I didn't give her time to recover. I picked up the divorce papers, tucking them neatly into the box, and made my way toward the door. She called after me, her voice laced with something that almost sounded like panic. Where do you think you're going? I didn't stop. I grabbed my coat, slipped my shoes back on, and reached for the keys in my pocket. You said you've moved on, I said casually, pausing just long enough to glance over my shoulder. Then you shouldn't care where I go, right? Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass, her nails tapping against the surface in that impatient, irritated way she always did when she wasn't in control of a situation. You're being childish, she said, forcing a small laugh. This doesn't have to be dramatic, you know. We can handle this like adults. I nodded. Of course. And as an adult, I think your new boyfriend deserves to see what you've so kindly gifted me tonight. That got her attention. She set her wine down a little too hard, her lips pressing into a thin line. What do you mean by that? I smiled. I mean, you should be the first to know that you're officially free now. You did say he gives you everything I never could, right? Let's make sure he's as committed as you think he is. She inhaled sharply through her nose. You're not going to his place. Why not? It's only fair. Her face tightened. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the calculations, the sudden realization that she had played her hand too soon. Maybe she thought I would beg. Maybe she thought I'd break, that I'd ask her to reconsider, that I'd fight for her while she played the role of the one who had already moved on. But I wasn't playing that game. I wasn't going to be the husband who pleaded for answers. I wasn't going to be the one who wallowed in heartbreak while she played the victim of a marriage that had grown stale. No, I was going to take the power she thought she had over me and flip it right back in her face. She took a step forward, crossing her arms. Look, this is between us, all right? There's no need to involve. I laughed. Actually laughed. Between us. I gestured at the papers in my hand. Lenora, you already made this a three-person situation the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. And now that you've decided to leave, I think it's only fair to let him know exactly what he's signing up for. Her jaw clenched. I don't know what you think this will accomplish, but I didn't let her finish. You know what's funny? I asked, stepping closer. You act like I'm the predictable one. Like I'm some boring, steady thing that never changes. But here you are, panicking. Why? Because I'm not reacting the way you thought I would. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I nodded, more to myself than to her. Yeah, that's what I thought. I turned toward the door again, but this time, she moved faster. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path, her eyes narrowed. Don't do this, she said firmly. I tilted my head. Why not? She exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding into her voice. Because I know you. You're not the type to be petty. I let out another small laugh, shaking my head. You know, I really thought I knew you too. I held up the divorce papers, waving them slightly. But it turns out, we're both full of surprises. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was just silence. Heavy, loaded silence. Then, she sighed, stepping back just enough to let me pass. But I saw it in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. She wasn't as confident as she wanted to be. And that was enough for me. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to make a scene. I had already done the one thing she hadn't expected. I had stayed calm. And now, She was the one who didn't know what would happen next. I stepped past Lenora, pulling the door open, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. There was no rush of anger, no impulse to lash out or demand an explanation. Instead, there was a calm certainty washing over me, something she hadn't expected. That was the key. The moment she realized she didn't have control over this, over me, was the moment she started to unravel. She grabbed my wrist before I could leave, her fingers pressing against my skin just enough to feel her hesitation. "Please," she said, her voice lower now, almost soft. "Don't go to him." I turned my head slightly, meeting her gaze. It was the first time that night she looked unsure. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that hinted at the truth she hadn't been ready to admit, even to herself. I sighed, pulling my wrist free. "Why not, Lenora? What's wrong? I thought he was everything you wanted." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, watching me, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. For all her confidence, for all her planning, she hadn't accounted for this moment. She thought I would break. She thought I would either fight for her or walk away defeated. She never considered that I'd simply change the game. I didn't want it to be like this, she admitted finally, wrapping her arms around herself. "I wanted us to part on good terms." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "Good terms? You left me a box with divorce papers and a 3-word note. What part of that is good terms?" She swallowed, glancing away. "I just thought it would be easier that way. Cleaner. Cleaner," I echoed, rolling the word around on my tongue. "Right. Because nothing says respect like treating your marriage like a business transaction." Her eyes flickered with something. Regret? No, it wasn't regret. It was annoyance. She hated that I wasn't playing along, that I wasn't giving her the reaction she wanted. I crossed my arms, watching her carefully. "You want to know what I think?" I asked. She didn't respond, but I could tell she was listening. "I think you wanted an easy exit. I think you wanted to leave without feeling guilty, without having to face the reality of what you did. But the moment I didn't give you that, the moment I made it clear that I wasn't just going to disappear quietly, you started second-guessing yourself." I took a step forward, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Because deep down, you're not sure if you made the right choice." She tensed. That hit home. Her lips parted, her breath quickened, but no words came out. She wasn't used to this. She was used to having the upper hand, to controlling the narrative. But now, standing in front of me, she was the one scrambling for footing. "I'm going," I said finally. "You can try to justify this to yourself however you want. But if you're so sure that this is what you want, then nothing I do should matter, right?" She hesitated. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see the truth she wouldn't say aloud. Then, I walked out, leaving her standing in the doorway, trapped in the mess she had created. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a wave of clarity. I hadn't realized how suffocating it had felt inside that house, surrounded by the ghost of a life I thought I understood. But now, standing there, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was freedom, maybe it was just the first taste of real perspective. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Lenora script my ending. I walked to my car, tossing the box with the divorce papers onto the passenger seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I sat there, staring through the windshield, letting the moment sink in. I had a choice. I could drive off, disappear into the night, and let Lenora go on believing she had the last word. Or, I could do exactly what she feared the most. I could force her to face the truth. I pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally typed in the name I hadn't wanted to admit I already knew. Malcolm Grant. That was him. The man she had chosen over me. I wasn't stupid. I had suspected for months that something was off. The way she smiled at her phone, the sudden work dinners, the careful way she started dressing, like she was trying to impress someone new. And now, with everything laid out in front of me, it all clicked into place. Malcolm was younger than me by a few years, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a lifestyle magazine. Tailored suits, slick back hair, the kind of confidence that made people believe he had all the answers. He worked in sales, which made sense. Lenora always did have a thing for men who could talk their way into anything. I scrolled through his social media, my eyes scanning the carefully curated life he had built online. Expensive dinners, business trips, flashy watches, everything about him screamed, "Look at me." I smirked. People like him thrived on appearances. And that's exactly where I was going to hit him. I started the car, my decision made. It was time for Malcolm to see exactly what he was signing up for. The drive to his apartment was quick. I knew the address. Lenora had slipped up once, months ago, when she accidentally left her GPS open. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. A mistake. Now, I knew better. I pulled up outside, parking just down the street. The building was one of those upscale, modern places, all glass and steel, the kind of place where people pretended they were more successful than they actually were. I grabbed the box from the passenger seat and stepped out, walking up to the entrance like I belonged there. The doorman barely glanced at me as I pushed through, heading straight for the elevator. Malcolm's apartment was on the 15th floor. I knocked once, twice. Then, I heard footsteps. The door opened, and there he was, Malcolm Grant, standing there in a fitted dress shirt, his sleeves rolled up just enough to show off his expensive watch. His hair was slightly messy, like he had just gotten comfortable after a long day of playing the part of a successful man. He frowned when he saw me. "Can I help you?" I smiled, holding up the box. "Yeah, thought you might want to see what your girlfriend got me tonight." He blinked, confused for a moment, before his expression darkened. "I don't know who you think you." I pushed past him, stepping into his apartment before he could stop me. It was exactly what I expected: clean, expensive, staged. There was no sign of Lenora, but I knew she had been here. I could feel it in the air, in the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered. I set the box down on his glass coffee table, flipping the lid open so the divorce papers were front and center. "Recognize her signature?" I asked casually. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the papers, then back at me. "What are you trying to do here?" I shrugged, leaning against the back of his couch. "Oh, nothing. Just thought you deserved to know exactly what you're getting yourself into." His nostrils flared. "I don't see how this concerns you anymore." "That's where you're wrong." I gestured at the papers. "See, up until a few hours ago, I was still married to Lenora. And according to her, you're the reason she's moving on. That means we've got a connection, you and me. You took something that was mine, so I figured I'd return the favor." His eyes narrowed. "What favor?" I pulled out my phone, unlocking the screen. "Well, here's the thing, Malcolm, you and I both know how this ends. You think you're different. You think you're the exception. But you're not." I scrolled through the messages I had saved, screenshots of the times Lenora had denied ever seeing anyone else, the lies she told to keep me from questioning her. Then, I pulled up a voice recording. I pressed play. Lenora's voice filled the apartment. "I don't love him anymore. But I need to make sure I have everything set up first. I can't risk leaving until I know you're really serious about us." I watched as Malcolm's face changed. The smugness, the confidence, it cracked, just like Lenora's had. I let the recording play a little longer before pausing it. "So tell me, Malcolm, are you really serious about her? Because from where I'm standing, she sounds a lot more concerned about her own security than she does about you." His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at the papers again, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. I grabbed the box, tucking the papers back inside. "I just thought you should know," I said simply. Then, without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, leaving Malcolm standing there in the wreckage of the fantasy he thought he was living. The hallway outside Malcolm's apartment felt colder than it had minutes before. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the way my pulse had slowed now that the adrenaline was fading. I stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers drop, my reflection staring back at me in the mirrored doors. I expected to feel something different, some rush of satisfaction, some twisted sense of victory. But all I felt was tired. I walked through the lobby and back out onto the street, my breath curling in the night air. The city buzzed around me, people moving in and out of bars, laughing, talking, their lives unaffected by the small war that had just taken place in that apartment. I stood there for a moment, grounding myself. Then, I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Nothing from Lenora. Good. I wasn't interested in hearing whatever excuse she was about to spin. Not tonight. Not ever. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past as I let my thoughts settle. There was a time when I would have done anything to fix this marriage, when I would have sat down with Lenora and begged her to tell me what went wrong. But that man was gone. That version of me had died the moment I opened that box and found my life neatly packaged inside. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. I glanced over. Incoming call, Lenora. I let it ring. Then, a second call. Then a text. I exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel a little tighter. She wasn't going to let this go easily, was she? I pulled into a parking lot, shutting off the engine, and finally opened the message. Lenora, we need to talk. Call me. No apology. No explanation. Just a demand. I stared at the screen, debating whether to ignore it or give her the response she wasn't expecting. Then, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't from Lenora. Unknown number. We need to meet. It's about your wife. I frowned, my mind immediately racing through the possibilities. Malcolm? No. He had no reason to reach out. Not yet. Someone else. But who? Another message came through. Unknown number. Don't tell her. Just meet me at Larkwood Cafe. 10 p.m. I checked the clock. 9:47. I should have ignored it. I should have driven home, locked the door, and left this entire mess behind me. But something about the message, something about the urgency in those words made my gut twist. Who else knew? And why did I have the feeling that, whatever this was, I wasn't going to like it? I put the car back in gear and headed toward the cafe. Larkwood Cafe wasn't the kind of place that stayed open late. It was one of those small, tucked-away spots that served overpriced coffee and catered to the kind of people who liked to pretend they were always in deep thought. By the time I pulled into the lot, most of the lights inside had already been dimmed, and only a handful of tables were occupied. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Then I saw him. A man sat near the window, stirring a cup of coffee he clearly had no intention of drinking. He was older than me, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen its fair share of disappointments. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, like he had given up halfway through the day. The moment he saw me, he gestured to the seat across from him. I hesitated, then walked over and sat down. You the one who texted me? He nodded. Yeah. I studied him, waiting. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and slid it across the table. You should see this. I glanced down. A video was paused on the screen. I didn't want to press play. I already knew. But I did. And the moment the video started, my stomach dropped. Lenora, sitting across from this man, her hand covering his. Her voice soft, laughing, leaning in the way she used to lean toward me. The timestamp on the video was from 6 months ago. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the phone. Who are you? The man sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. My name is Victor, he said finally. And until a few weeks ago, I was engaged to your wife. I didn't move, didn't blink. The words sat between us, heavy and absurd. Engaged? I forced myself to breathe, my fingers loosening around the phone before I set it back down on the table. My thoughts scrambled to make sense of what I'd just seen, but nothing fit. Lenora had been with Malcolm. Lenora had been my wife. But now, there was Victor. Another man. Another lie. Victor exhaled, running a hand over his tired face before leaning back in his chair. Yeah, engaged. Thought you'd want to know. A dry laugh escaped me, humorless and bitter. You expect me to believe that my wife, who just handed me divorce papers, was planning a whole other marriage behind my back. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was sizing up just how much I could handle. You saw the video. I've got more. He tapped his phone. You want timestamps? Messages? Flight tickets? I've got all of it. I let that sink in. Lenora had been planning something much bigger than just an affair. This wasn't just stepping out on me with Malcolm, wasn't just a midlife crisis fueled by some desperate need for excitement. No, she had been building something. Constructing an entire separate life, weaving two stories together like she could hold the strings and never let them tangle. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table, keeping my voice steady. How long? Victor's jaw tightened. A little over a year. A year. She had been doing this for a year. While I was making plans for our anniversary, while I was coming home every night to a woman who smiled like everything was fine, she had been, what? Playing fiancé to another man? Telling him the same thing she once told me? I looked at Victor. How did you find out? His mouth pressed into a thin line. Same way you did, I imagine. Something wasn't adding up. Late nights, sudden trips, the way she'd pull back whenever I tried to get closer. He huffed out a humorless laugh. At first, I figured maybe she was just nervous. Commitment issues, you know? But then I started noticing the lies. Little ones. One she didn't think I'd catch. I nodded slowly, understanding all too well. The way she used to smile at me while feeding me half-truths, making me believe that my gut feeling was nothing more than paranoia. Victor took a sip of his coffee before setting it down with a dull clink. Last month, I got a message. An anonymous tip. Someone sent me a picture of her. With him. He gestured toward his phone. Not me. Not you. Him. I blinked. Wait, you mean? Malcolm. Victor's expression darkened. Yeah. My breath caught. So you're telling me? She was juggling both of us, he said flatly. Me and him. Playing two men at once, probably waiting to see which option worked out best. He shook his head. Guess neither of us made the cut. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling sharply. Unbelievable. I had thought Malcolm was the reason. Thought he was the man she had thrown our marriage away for. But he was just another piece of the puzzle, just another name on a list that was longer than I ever could have imagined. She's good, I muttered. Victor scoffed. Yeah, too good. I sat there, staring at the table, feeling the weight of it all settle into my chest. Lenora had never been just dissatisfied. She had been calculating. Every move, every lie, it was all part of some twisted game, some backup plan in case things didn't go her way. And now, with everything crumbling around her, she was scrambling to keep control. Victor shifted in his seat. So what are you going to do? I thought about it. Really thought about it. The old me, the man I had been before tonight, might have walked away. Might have taken the divorce papers, signed them, and disappeared without looking back. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I glanced at Victor. You still have all that evidence? He smirked. Every last bit. A slow, knowing grin spread across my face. Good. Because if Lenora wanted to play games, then it was time for her to learn that she wasn't the only one who knew how to move the pieces. I sat there, letting the weight of everything settle in. The lies, the manipulation, the years I spent believing I had a wife who, at the very least, respected me enough to be honest. But Lenora wasn't just unfaithful, she was strategic. She built a web of deception so intricate that even she probably lost track of the truth. But now, that web was unraveling. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. So, what's the plan? I exhaled slowly, feeling the last of my hesitation burn away. We let her fall on her own. He raised an eyebrow. Meaning? I smirked. We don't need to confront her. We don't need revenge. We just need the truth to do what it does best, tear down the lies. Victor gave a slow nod, understanding exactly what I meant. Lenora had spent months, maybe years, carefully constructing a future where she controlled every outcome. But the moment Malcolm, Victor, and I knew about each other, the illusion cracked. She thrived in secrecy, in the shadows, in keeping people apart. Now, the walls were closing in. And all we had to do was let her world collapse under the weight of its own deception. The next morning, I made the call. Lenora picked up after the second ring, her voice carefully controlled. You finally decided to talk. I kept my tone light. Yeah. Figured you deserved a response. She hesitated, probably waiting for anger, for heartbreak, for anything she could use to manipulate the situation. But I gave her nothing. You're signing the papers? She asked. I smiled. Of course. I think it's time we both move on. A pause. Then, good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I chuckled, the sound making her shift uncomfortably. Oh, I'm being very reasonable, Lenora. Silence. Then, just the faintest edge of uncertainty in her voice. What does that mean? I let the words hang in the air, enjoying the way she started to realize she no longer had the upper hand. It means, I said finally, that you might want to check in on Malcolm. She inhaled sharply. What did you do? I shook my head. Not a thing. But let's just say, he's not as committed as you thought. Her breath caught. That was all I needed. I hung up, letting her sit with that. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a new apartment, my apartment. No shared space filled with memories of someone who never really loved me. Just a clean slate, a fresh start. I sipped my coffee, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up. A message from Victor. Victor. Looks like Malcolm dumped her. No surprise there. I smirked. Then another message came through. Victor. Heard she tried reaching out to me. Didn't bother responding. I leaned back, staring out the window, feeling lighter than I had in years. It was over. The chapter with Lenora was officially closed. And not because I had fought to expose her, not because I had played her game, but because she had built a future on lies, and it had crumbled under its own weight. And me? I was free. Free from the drama, the betrayal, the weight of wondering whether I had been enough. I had been enough. Lenora just never was. A slow smile spread across my face as I typed out my reply to Victor. Me, we won without ever playing. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it.